he's confused the Declaration and the Constitution on some level. The Constitution doesn't talk about taxation without representation. That was a declaration.
Right.
So you've already confused some basic things. The idea that we're separating from King George, and so we're the masters asking their slaves, like, what do you think? The Constitution wasn't us separating from King George. That was the Declaration. So you've already confused some major thoughts in this along the way.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, huge glaring error, the thought that no people of color were involved in any of the process, then you clearly don't understand what happened. Because when the Founding Fathers got together to draft the Constitution, right, as different colonies sent their representatives, Founding Fathers meet in Independence Hall. In 1787, they draft the Constitution. However, once it's written, it had to be ratified in 9 of the 13 states, at least 9, to then be accepted in the 13 colonies. Here's where it becomes interesting. In the different states, they had ratification conventions. You know who was present at the ratification conventions? Black and brown people, and in some cases, women. So the notion that no black and brown people had a say in this, incorrect. In fact, it was reported that in Baltimore, more black people voted to ratify the Constitution than white people.
Yeah.
So black people were not anti the Constitution. It's such a bad take of history when your motive is that everything in America was racist, and that's the only lens you see things through, and you don't study original documents, right? He has a Harvard degree, so all you did was listen to your Harvard professors talk about how racist America is because they're woke. That's how you come to such a dumb conclusion.
Yeah. And again, folks, I want to remind you, when you go off to these academic bubbles where these college professors have done nothing more than push papers around and try out their wild-eyed theories in a bubble of academia without ever testing them in the real world or up against history, everything is revised through what I'm calling the orthodoxy of ideology, right? It's become a religion that you have to adhere to, and that's what you have to continue to spout. This is the result of what you get. And then you got these bobbleheads on The View who are just going, yeah, and people are clapping for it and things like this because you got a Harvard degree by your name, and so you're supposedly sounding... But he's so stupid, he can't even do a good black impression. Like he couldn't even do a good impression. Like that's how vanilla his blackness is. I don't know if we're supposed to say that or not, and I don't really care because I like saying it. His vanilla blackness. But this whole thing, like you guys, when you look at history, how do they eliminate the Frederick Douglasses of the world? I mean, and that's a well-known name.
Right.
There's many others that are lost to history because, again, we don't know our history. How do they reconcile this nonsense?
So one of the even great ironies of what he was doing on The View was he was promoting his book, and it was a black man's take on the Constitution. And he's saying, here's how black people view the Constitution. Well, there actually was another black man's take on the Constitution called Frederick Douglass, and he actually had a lot of writings, a lot of lectures on this. You can go back and read his writings. Even in his autobiography, he gets into this. And one of the silly things today, you have the Colin Kaepernicks of the world who will even look at Frederick Douglass. Now go, see, Frederick Douglass even said negative things about the Constitution. Frederick Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies. Okay, now it's kind of weird that you wrote 3 about yourself, but...
It sounds like Obama.
You know, since nobody knows how long they're going to live, he wrote one well before the Civil War unfolds, and he had just escaped slavery, and he joins the abolition movement. But one of the things that he has heard from other abolitionists was that the reason we have slavery in America is because of the Constitution, right? Kind of what this Harvard-educated lawyer just told us on The View is the reason we have that's because of the Constitution. And then there was an abolitionist who challenged them, like, show me that in the Constitution. Show me in the Constitution where it protects or preserves slavery. So he actually reads Constitution. He ends up becoming a constitutional scholar in his study of the Constitution. He goes back and reads Madison's notes, and he reads the Federalist Papers, and like literally all the surrounding documents that you could read. He becomes a constitutional scholar. His second autobiography, he has a major change of position. And actually, you even see this in some of his lectures. His first autobiography came out in 1849, but he gave a lecture in 1852 called What is the 4th of July to a Black Man? And in this speech, this is where like Colin Kaepernick talked about, Frederick Douglass said, right, that black people can't celebrate the 4th of July because of, you know, the fact that they were still slaves and they're not free, except read more of the speech. What he said was that the promises of the Declaration hadn't been fully realized. He says, but we should take hope in the fact that in the Constitution, there's not one vestige of this terrible institution of slavery. And if people argue today that it is a pro-slavery document, why doesn't it talk about or defend the position of slavery? Why doesn't it say that states have the right to slavery? Instead, you'll find this is a glorious liberty document. And this is where in his second autobiography, he takes that position. His third autobiography is at the end of the Civil War. And so now he's seen the fulfillment of the promises of the Declaration, where when the founding fathers first wrote that all men were created equal, he's now seeing that upheld with the 13th, the 14th, the 15th Amendment. And he says, America's the most amazing nation in the world because they're doing things in America nobody else is doing in the world. Frederick Douglass is a guy who actually lived through that, where people today, like you have this, right, this gentleman, right, who's really, he identifies himself as an online provocateur, is what he says, right? He's an author, he's an attorney, but when he claims the mantle of victimhood status, I feel like if we're comparing your resume and Frederick Douglass, right, someone who actually was a slave who went through that, he probably has a better argument for that description of victimhood than you would. And Frederick Douglass doesn't take that mantle. He says instead, look at what America accomplished and achieved. Look at what they've done. And anti-slavery, the Constitution is. It's a very different perspective. But modern social justice warriors don't want to actually reference some of the genuine heroes who were oppressed on incredible levels. They don't want to reference them because they didn't play the victim status or card, and they actually praise America for conquering these levels of evil. And because it doesn't fit the narrative that America should be praised for conquering evil, they don't want to quote the actual people who were the heroes of these scenarios.